My husband's ex-girlfriend donated a kidney to me in secret. After the surgery, her health rapidly deteriorated, and my husband took care of her with overwhelming attention. Then, from her moral pedestal, she would scold me, "Nina, how do you think Claire ended up like this? Can't you be a little more understanding?" Endless arguments followed, and eventually, I was consumed by emotional exhaustion. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the moment just before my kidney transplant surgery. I immediately removed the oxygen tube. I won't continue with the surgery. I'm giving up on the treatment. I never imagined that after my death, my husband would lose his sanity. The fluorescent light above my head flickered, making me dizzy. The sound of the doctor's voice, announcing the countdown to the transplant, echoed in my ears. Suddenly, I realized I had been reborn, and without hesitation, I called the doctor. Struggling, I sat up on the operating table. "Dr. Lucas, I am not going through with the surgery. I am giving up the treatment." Dr. Lucas was shocked, repeatedly emphasizing that my body could not wait any longer and that if I missed this chance, I might not find another compatible donor in time. I thanked him but remained firm. The doctor sighed in resignation and notified everyone to cancel the surgery. After signing the consent form for organ donation, I returned to the hospital lounge I shared with Ryan. I started packing my things. I had been diagnosed with kidney failure in the second year of our marriage, while we were trying to conceive. At that time, Ryan and I were constantly fighting because of Claire. I thought having a baby might bring us closer, but instead, I received the terrible news about my health. Strictly speaking, Claire wasn't really Ryan's ex-girlfriend. She had appeared in his life while I was abroad pursuing my career as a ballet dancer, and they never officially became a couple. I was ambitious and determined not to give up my career for love, and I succeeded, becoming the principal dancer at the Joffrey Ballet in just 2 years. When I returned, I discovered that Ryan had waited for me all that time. His devotion deeply moved me, and the memories of our time together as students filled me with warmth. I accepted his proposal. It was only after we married that I learned about Claire. I found out they had almost become a couple, but my return to the United States had separated them. Due to my upbringing, I have always been sensitive and insecure in relationships. Since I found out about Claire, I couldn't sleep at night, and the arguments between Ryan and me became more intense. I questioned him, asking why he claimed to love me but still had feelings for someone else. He accused me of being irrational and making things up. As the fights escalated, Ryan began working late just to avoid coming home. It wasn't until I sought help from a therapist that I realized I still loved Ryan, this man who had been such an important part of my youth. So I called him and asked him to come home that night. He rushed back, hugging me like he never wanted to let go. He promised to transfer Claire to another city and focus on our marriage from then on. It was around that time that I went for a checkup, planning to start preparing for a pregnancy. Shortly after, the doctor told me they had found a compatible kidney donor. The donor wished to remain anonymous and didn't want to reveal their identity. I understood, but I never imagined that person would be Claire. The day after my surgery, Ryan sat by my bed with red eyes and told me I owed Claire a huge debt. From that moment on, he showered her with care and attention. I couldn't show any dissatisfaction, or I'd be seen as ungrateful, a woman without a heart. I could only watch as Claire slowly took Ryan away from me. I had no power to stop it. In the end, I was consumed by stress. When I died, Ryan remained by Claire's side, refusing to leave her for even a moment. This time, I chose to let them be and free myself. I had lived in the hospital lounge for 2 years, and packing took 3 suitcases. I sat on the couch, waiting until 11 at night. Ryan still hadn't come home. I called him. He answered almost immediately, but on the other side of the phone, it was Claire's voice. "Mrs. Carter, is there something you need from Mr. Carter?" He's exhausted from consecutive meetings and fell asleep in the office. Claire had just undergone kidney transplant surgery in Chicago. I knew that. But I didn't expect her to go straight to Ryan's office after leaving the operating table. She really loved him. I spoke calmly. It's nothing important. Just tell him I've left the divorce papers on the dining table. He can sign them when he has time. Claire let out a gasp of surprise on the other end of the line, barely able to contain her excitement. Before she could say anything else, I hung up. I moved back to my apartment in Gold Coast, the one I had bought before we got married. I thought Ryan would come after me or at least call to discuss the divorce, but it turned out I was thinking too much. There was no word from him. He had even turned off his phone. With no other option, I went to his office. To my surprise, the receptionist informed me that Ryan had been in a car accident 3 days earlier. His phone had been smashed, and he hadn't had a chance to replace it. He had just undergone surgery, and was now out of danger. My first reaction wasn't concern but amusement. I had been diagnosed with kidney failure, and hadn't told him. He had a car accident, and I didn't know. This marriage had clearly come to an end. I drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and as expected, I found Claire outside the private suite. She was casually dressed with perfectly applied makeup, radiating kindness. I looked toward the hospital room. Ryan isn't here. Mr. Carter is having some tests done. He should be back in about an hour. Claire's expression turned cold as she closed the door to the suite. Why don't you go home? Her disdain for me was evident. I smirked mockingly. Claire, you can play the role of Mrs. Carter all you want after the divorce. But right now, you're still not qualified. Claire frowned, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that all you have to say? She paused for a moment, then smiled slyly. Did you know that when Ryan was unconscious and being rushed to the hospital, he was calling my name the whole time? That's why the hospital called me, not you, Mrs. Carter. She bit into the words Mrs. Carter, her tone full of mockery. In the past, hearing this would have enraged me, but after all the arguments and silences, I didn't care anymore. I was dying anyway. What did it matter what I said? I stayed quiet, took the divorce papers out of my bag, and handed them to him. In that case, could you give this to Mr. Carter? Have him sign them and return them to me when he has a chance. As I spoke, I observed the change on Claire's face. She grabbed my wrist, trying to make me hit her with the papers. The divorce documents scattered everywhere, and Claire turned her head to the side, dramatically covering her face with her hand, pretending to be in pain. I winced at the sharp pain in my wrist, stifling a groan. Before I could react, Ryan's cold, angry voice came from behind me. Apologize. Ryan approached furiously, immediately placing Claire behind him, protecting her. Claire threw me a triumphant smile, as if claiming her territory. I felt my blood boil. It didn't matter who Ryan wanted to protect, but if Claire thought she could accuse me openly, she was gravely mistaken. I coldly bent down to pick up the divorce papers, walked up to Claire, and slammed them against her face. Ryan tried to stop me, but it was too late. I glared at her with fury. Next time you try to accuse me, at least make it convincing. The right side of Claire's face blushed, tears filled her eyes as she looked at Ryan with a pitiful expression. Ryan, I didn't do anything, she said in a trembling voice. Ryan frowned deeply, pushing her further behind him, his eyes fixed on me. Can you leave her out of this? Why are you acting so crazy? I had heard that 1,000 times before. I replied calmly, unfazed. If you don't want your assistant hurt again, just sign the divorce papers. Ryan's face was tight with anger, but after a moment, he turned to Claire with a professional tone. I'm sorry, my wife didn't mean it. Consider this a work injury, keep the receipts, and the company will reimburse you. You've worked hard these days, you can go home now. Thank you, Mr. Carter, Claire responded gratefully, gathering her things and leaving the room. When she was gone, Ryan followed me to the suite. As soon as we entered, he took me in his arms, burying his face in my neck. "Nina, you have no compassion. That night when I saw you had called me repeatedly, saying you wanted a divorce, I panicked. I rushed home and ended up in that car accident. And now you won't even come to the hospital. Do you still want to go through with the divorce?" His voice broke as he clung to me like a lost puppy. "Nina, please have mercy on me. I should have felt pity for him, right? But who pities me? And it's fine if he wants to blame me for the accident, I'll accept it. But what did he mean by me not going to the hospital because I was being difficult?" My blood started to boil. However, Ryan ignored my growing frustration and tried to kiss me. Suddenly, an image of Claire in his arms in my past life crossed my mind, and a feeling of disgust overwhelmed me. I pushed him away violently, ran to the bathroom, and collapsed, trembling with revulsion. When I returned, Ryan's face had turned cold. "Do I disgust you that much, Nina? Can't you even pretend for a moment? If you need someone, go find your precious Claire," I replied, my voice as cold as his. "She's sweet and considerate, everything I'm not, right?" I interrupted him before he could answer, throwing the divorce papers at him again. "Just sign the papers, the sooner the better." Ryan was at a loss for words, his anger barely contained. After a tense silence, he forced an explanation, his voice filled with frustration. "I've told you 1,000 times, Claire is just an employee. There's nothing between us, Nina. Why can't you believe me?" I looked at him with eyes full of fury, and his tone softened in response. "Nina, I'm recovering from an accident," he pleaded, trying to take my hand. Instinctively, I pulled it away. Ryan took a deep breath, his frustration evident, but even then, he knelt before me, trying to calm me down, his eyes full of sincerity. I looked at him, feeling bitterness in my chest. In my past life, he had apologized countless times for Claire, explaining and asking for my forgiveness, and every time, I forgave him. But what did I get in return? Every time Claire and I clashed, it was always me, as a woman, who saw through Claire's game. I knew exactly what she was doing, but Ryan always thought I was the one being irrational, the one creating problems. This wouldn't change no matter how many lives I lived. I was exhausted. "Ryan, let's end this. In 3 days, I'll be waiting at the county clerk's office in Co-op. If you don't show up, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. I don't want to die being labeled as the tragic widow of Ryan Carter." Without saying more, I turned and left. Behind me, I heard his voice break, filled with frustration and vulnerability. "Nina, why do you always act so hastily? Don't you realize how unfair you're being to me?" I had never heard him sound so fragile before. 3 days passed, and I stood outside the Coop County Clerk's office, but Ryan never showed up. I immediately called my lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. My health was deteriorating quickly, and I couldn't afford to wait any longer. That afternoon, as I returned from the hospital, I found Ryan standing angrily outside my apartment on Gold Coast. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his entire posture radiated tension. Claire was behind him, her eyes red and swollen, the clear mark of 5 fingers on her pale cheek. When she saw me, she flinched instinctively, as if she feared I would hit her again. I raised an eyebrow, annoyed. "Trying this trick again? Didn't you have enough the last time?" "Nina, stop!" Ryan exploded, shouting at me with a mixture of fury and disappointment. "You've crossed the line. You vandalized my car, hired people to accuse me, and you hit Claire. Do you realize you're breaking the law?" He started listing my supposed crimes as if I were a criminal mastermind. Honestly, if he and Claire hadn't shown up at my door, I wouldn't have even known I had committed so many crimes. I opened my mouth to make a sarcastic comment, but Claire interrupted me. "Mrs. Carter, Ryan and I are just co-workers. I come from a difficult family, worked hard, studied a lot, and finally, I managed to make something of myself. I don't want to go back home. I'll quit if that helps. Please let me go." As she spoke, she tried to kneel in front of me, but Ryan quickly lifted her up. His face burned with anger as he looked at me. "Look at what you've reduced her to. Is this what you wanted?" I was tired of always being the villain in this story. I knew Ryan would eventually try something more drastic. When he appeared at my apartment door on the Gold Coast, furious, with Claire by his side, showing the mark of 5 fingers on her face, it was clear that he wouldn't leave me alone so easily. His expression was tense, as if I was to blame for all his problems, and, as always, Claire played the perfect victim, trying to hide behind Ryan, pretending to be afraid. I knew that trick well. "Nina, enough," Ryan exploded. "You've crossed all the lines, vandalizing my car, hiring people to harass me, and now this? You hit Claire." I could barely believe the absurdity of the accusations, but it was typical of Ryan to blame me when things got out of control. Before I could respond, Claire intervened with her trembling and theatrical voice. "Mrs. Carter, please leave me alone. I don't want to cause more trouble. I just want to work. We don't need to be enemies." She had the audacity to kneel before me, pretending to be humble, but what I saw in her eyes was pure triumph. Claire was playing a dangerous game, and I was tired of being part of it. "Claire, get up," Ryan ordered as he helped her stand. Then he turned to me, approaching with his finger raised. "Don't you realize how low you've fallen? Why are you acting like this? This isn't you, Nina." I laughed bitterly, a dry laugh that echoed through the hallway. Me, lowering myself? From the start, I was the one trying to keep our relationship afloat, while Ryan allowed himself to be manipulated by this woman in front of me. Claire always played the victim, and he always fell for it. And now, of course, I was the villain, the ungrateful one who couldn't bear the generosity of the Saint Claire. "You know what's the funniest thing, Ryan?" I said, crossing my arms. "From the beginning, you always took her side. From the moment you found out she was the one who donated the kidney, you put her on a pedestal. And now, you blame me for not kneeling down and thanking her for taking everything, including you." He tried to respond, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. "When you were in that hospital, calling her while I was dying of pain and exhaustion because of you, I still forgave you every time. Forgave you for your nights out, for your excuses, for your blindness to what was happening right in front of you." Claire began to silently sob, turning the scene into an Oscar-worthy performance. "She manipulates you, Ryan? Do you really think I'm to blame for all this?" I continued, ignoring Claire. "Since when am I the only one at fault here? Who has spent the last few months by her side while I was left alone at home?" "Nina, that's not fair," Ryan said in a choked voice. "You know I never wanted this to happen. I was only protecting," I interrupted him. "Taking care of her? How noble of you. While I was drowning in our relationship, you were worried about Claire's health. And now here she is, using her tears to manipulate you once again. But guess what, Ryan? This time, I won't back down." Claire started to cry harder, as if trying to turn the scene into an even bigger drama. She wanted me to be the villain in her perfect story. I approached her with chilling calmness, and Claire slowly backed up against the wall. Ryan tried to move to protect her again, as he always did, but I raised my hands, indicating that I had no intention of harming her. He hesitated. "Claire, you already have everything, don't you?" I said in a low, threatening voice. "You have Ryan by your side, even though you shouldn't. You've turned him into your knight in shining armor, and I'm just a crazy woman ruining your happy ending." She sobbed, trying to appear more defenseless, but I couldn't hold back any longer. "Do you know what really infuriates me about all this? It's not that you donated the kidney. It's not that Ryan ran to take care of you in the hospital. It's that you pretended to be my friend while you were pulling him further away from me. And now you want me to be the villain? Fine, I'll be the villain. I took another step, and I saw Claire's eyes widen in fear. Nina, no, Ryan began to say, but I cut him off with a firm gesture. Shut up, Ryan. I'm talking to her now. I turned to Claire, my face only inches from hers. You played a very dangerous game. You manipulated, lied, and got what you wanted. Now listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Claire was breathing heavily, her tears falling freely. You can keep him. He's yours now. But never forget one thing. He will always come back to me, because deep down, he knows you'll never be enough. He's with you out of pity, out of obligation. But love? That died with me on the operating table. I threw the divorce papers in Ryan's face. For a second, Ryan looked too stunned to react. Sign those papers, Ryan, unless you want this farce to drag on forever. With wide eyes, he had no choice but to pick up the papers from the floor. Claire sobbed, playing her role of the victim to perfection, and I just watched the chaos they had created for themselves. I knew I would never be seen as the heroine, but at that moment, I didn't care anymore. Months passed since that day when Ryan finally signed the divorce papers. It was a bittersweet scene, a mixture of relief and frustration that I didn't know could be felt at the same time. Claire, still playing her victim role, feigned slight concern, but could barely hide the satisfaction of having Ryan all to herself. I, on the other hand, didn't shed a single tear when Ryan, with a trembling hand, signed the document that sealed the end of everything. I just watched him, impassive. He was devastated, but somehow, seeing his pain didn't completely console me. Deep down, I knew that chapter needed to close so that I could begin a new one. After the divorce, I moved to a new place, a quieter and more modern apartment in the city. I resumed my career as a dancer, which I had abandoned for love. Life began to get back on track. Each rehearsal, each performance brought me closer to the person I was before everything fell apart. My performances started gaining recognition, and soon I was invited to exclusive events, surrounded by people who truly valued my art, and, most importantly, my presence. I rebuilt myself. The past seemed distant, almost like a vague memory of a nightmare. Ryan and Claire became distant figures, ghosts of a life that was no longer mine. For a while, I thought I was finally free of them, until 6 months after the divorce, everything changed. It was a normal afternoon, after an exhausting rehearsal for an important performance. I was exhausted but happy when I received an unexpected message. I looked at my phone. And there it was, the name I hadn't seen in months, Ryan. The message was short but full of meaning. Can we talk? I need to see you. I felt a chill run down my spine, a mixture of fear and anger. What did he want now? What more could he take from me? I ignored the message and moved on, but a week later he came back. Literally. I was at a cafe, enjoying a rare moment of peace when Ryan showed up. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and an expression I had never seen before. He looked defeated. Nina, he began, hesitant, but I cut him off immediately. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice firm, with no trace of the woman he once knew. He sighed, rubbing his face before speaking. I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have let you go. I stayed silent, watching him calmly. In the past, those words would have stirred something inside me, but now I felt nothing but deep indifference. Claire and I, he continued, his voice breaking. We're done. She wasn't. He paused, searching for words. I realize now I never should have been with her. It was a mistake. You were always the one for me. It was almost comical. He was standing there, trying to salvage something he had destroyed himself. Claire had used him, just like I always knew she would. And now he was here, begging for a second chance. Ryan, do you really think you can just come back after everything? I asked, leaning in. Do you honestly think I'll forget what you did to me, what you put me through? He shook his head, desperate. I know, Nina. I know I messed up, but I was confused. Claire manipulated me. Yes, but the choice was always yours, I said, my voice cold. You always chose her. It was never me. In that moment, I felt nothing but contempt. He reached out, trying to take my hand, but I quickly pulled away. I loved you, Ryan. I gave you everything, and you replaced me with someone who was always in the shadows. You thought it was a game. Now that Claire's discarded you, you think you can use me as your plan B? I stood up, ready to leave. But before I could take the final step, an idea started to form in my mind. He was vulnerable. He was weak. I could just walk away, ignore him as if he were nothing. But what if, instead, I made him feel what I felt? What if I destroyed him the way he destroyed me? I turned to him, my face showing false sympathy. You know, Ryan, maybe I've been too hard on you. He looked up, surprised by the change in my tone. We can talk, I said, smiling sweetly, the kind of smile he knew all too well. The smile I always used when I wanted him to believe in me. Why don't you come to my apartment tomorrow night? He nodded, relieved, completely unaware of what was coming. The next night, I prepared everything. The stage was set for the revenge I had been waiting months for. He arrived on time, with the same defeated look on his face. I invited him in, and for the first time, he seemed out of place, unsure. Sit down, I said, offering him a glass of wine, which he accepted without hesitation. Let's talk about us. As he began to speak, apologizing, saying how he wanted to fix things, I watched him closely. It was all part of the plan. I let him talk. I let him believe there was a chance. I let him sink deeper into the lies he told himself. And when I finally saw that he was completely at my mercy, I struck. Ryan, do you know what hurts me the most? I asked, leaning in. The truth is, I've moved on. I'm happy without you. And you know what else? Seeing you beg is exactly what I needed to feel whole again. The shock on his face was obvious. He didn't expect that. He thought I still loved him, that there was still a part of me willing to forgive him. Leave, Ryan. And don't come back. I was done with you the day you chose Claire. And now I want you to feel what I felt. Disappear from my life like you did with my dignity. He tried to argue, but I cut him off with a cold smile. Now you know what it's like to be discarded. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving him alone, lost. That was the real revenge. I didn't need to destroy him physically. I had already broken him completely.